We always have the discussion about the uniforms and how it's the greatest visual in television with both of them wearing the home uniforms.
Absolutely, it is. It is the most beautiful football game. And Matt was talking about the old days of an Ohio State-Michigan game leading into USC, UCLA when we didn't have all the cable options and everything else going on. And as a child of the Midwest, that, most of the time, by the time we get to late November, it's not the best of weather. It's a bit gloomy outside. And then all of a sudden this Technicolor just hits you right in the face after Ohio State and Michigan slug it out for 3 or 3.5 hours with USC and UCLA. And again, the combination of the uniforms, the typically bright blue, beautiful baby blue skies, and if at the Rose Bowl, especially with the San Gabriels in the background, it is just the best looking game in football.
It really is. And you and I have talked about this before. I grew up, I'm old enough that I grew up with both teams playing at the Coliseum, sharing the Coliseum. So for the USC UCLA game, the stadium was split in half in terms of the fan base. And that was really what compelled them both to wear their home uniforms. Was the fact that they shared that stadium. And to your point, out here on the West Coast, I'm not on the West Coast anymore, but out on the West Coast, it was, you woke up, you watched the UCLA Michigan game, or if you were going to the UCLA game, you had a little portable TV with you, probably battery operated, whatever that you could, have out during your tailgating, and watch the Ohio State Michigan game before you went inside for the USC UCLA game, knowing that those two games more times than not determine the Rose Bowl competitors. And so it was that was that third Saturday in November. And I will tell you, growing up, the UCLA USC game, being locked in for that third Saturday in November, was always within a few days, give or take, of my birthday. Even as a kid, I did not care about my birthday. It was about the UCLA USC game. It was everything. My birthday, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. Yeah, whatever. We'll do whatever. That's fine. Whatever. It was all about the game that week.
And that was your birthday present, to get a Bruins win.
It was. Didn't happen very often back then. It really did not, USC ruined a lot of perfectly good birthdays when I was younger.
I want to stay out of the way here and soak up both the current 2023 matchup and wherever you guys want to take us throughout the history, and also the vitriol between the two.
Well, in terms of soaking up this year's matchup, it's soaked in bourbon or some other drown your sorrows beverage of choice. But Tony, at first item of business, I'm seeing the rumors on social media that Chip Kelly's done.
Sure.
Give us your insider read on if Chip Kelly really is done at UCLA.
I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people today within UCLA, with UCLA ties, close ties to the athletic department. The fact that we are sitting here at 8:20 Pacific Coast time on Monday night, and Chip Kelly is still the coach, means he will be the coach this week. They're not going to fire him as it gets closer to UCLA USC kickoff time. That would just be completely destructive. That having been said, Chip is coaching for his job Saturday. A win may be good enough, but not guaranteed. A loss pretty much guarantees he's done on Sunday. Not Monday, because then you got to start practice on Monday. UCLA's got to play Cal the following week. So it would or will be done on Sunday, with a loss for sure, even with a win possibly. One of the things that has been holding it up is the business theory. Martin Jarmond is a candidate for the Ohio State athletic director's job. And has interviewed for it once already, as Gene Smith retires at the end of the current academic year. it's a tough gig to fire your head football coach if you think you're on your way out the door, but leave that for someone else. Now, what I have found through our reporting at Last Word is they're not going to name Smith's replacement probably until March. That being the case, you're not going to wait. If you're Martin Jarman, that means you're not holding it off to see what happens with your job, your future at UCLA. You just have to do what you have to do, period. And you'll be around at least to figure out the back part of it, which is who replaces Chip. Chip's on a really, really, really short leash. You have an opportunity before you're going to the Big Ten, before you change conferences, to do something significant with your flagship program of football. Going in with a record of 6-6 or 7-5 or whatever they finished the season at isn't really the big push into the new conference that you need. And so, I think that, like I said, the fact that it's Monday night, they've started practice for the week for the game, and he's still there means he's there for the week. But next weekend or this upcoming weekend is a whole new world in the Chip Kelly watch.
I know Tim's going to want to ask you some questions, Tony, but I want to just follow up on one plot point. If Chip Kelly gets fired, then you have a young, very successful defensive coordinator there who's turned UCLA's defense around. And I know a lot of Trojan fans would love to poach Lynn from UCLA. And then if you're UCLA, you would hate for that to happen.
Right.
And so if we, deal with the carousel and the moving parts that are always part of every carousel season, the last few carousels, as you well know, have been wild. How much of a percentage chance would you sense inside the building at UCLA? Do you think they it does exist for Lynn to be promoted to head coach if Chip Kelly gets fired?
I think probably 50%, on a scale of 1 to 10, probably a 5. I would like it to be more towards a 7 or even higher. I think he is qualified for the job. I think you also have to go back to the lessons learned. And the lessons learned say, do not overlook the call coming from inside the house, because UCLA did that once before. They fired Jim Mora, had a perfectly good interim coach finish out the season, including the bowl game, who wanted the job, and instead Jed Fish is in Tucson beating UCLA. And so, lesson learned. They wanted to swing for the fences. Troy Aikman and Casey Wasserman wanted to swing for the fences, and they did. And, one of the people that I was on the phone with today extensively told me Chip doesn't even have Casey Wasserman's support anymore. And, Casey Wasserman was the guy who funded the entire going out and getting Chip Kelly and the flights back and forth to New Hampshire to woo him and all of those things. And he doesn't really even have Casey's support anymore. I think getting someone like D'Anton Lynn would be uplifting for the program. As you pointed out, and as I'm sure we'll talk about in further detail, UCLA's defense, ironically, is what has held the season together, which was the bane of Kelly's existence before. He's a young guy. He's got a very bright future as a head coach somewhere. You don't want it to be somewhere else.
Well, there's another person with ties. So here's my biggest concern. So when you guys, I'm not gonna lie, when you guys got Chip Kelly and USC was absolutely in trouble. we're starting to head towards that nadir with Mr. Helton.
Sure.
I thought there was a turning point. I was really worried. There's another name now that could be coming with ties to Southern California in Jonathan Smith. He's from Pasadena. Great coach. Was what's going on up in Oregon at Oregon State? I know he's an Oregon State grad. I know he's a Beaver, diehard, but he's got to think about his career as well. What are you hearing as far as, I know you're talking about from within, but what are you hearing from outside the university?
I have heard that they would have interest in Jonathan Smith and in talking with him. I am not sure how much interest Smith would have in the job. And I agree with you. He's got to look at his future, and nobody knows what happens to Oregon State, 9 months from now or 6 months from now or whatever. Nobody knows where they're going, if it's the Mountain West or if it's a reformulated Pac whatever. And he's got to worry about his future. He also just got an extension last year from Oregon State, one that they will have a hard time meeting financially if they don't have a significant new TV contract, regardless of where that contract comes from, whichever conference or whatever ties it comes from. So there is a more secure opportunity to go to UCLA. But having talked with Smith in the past and having interviewed him, I know his heart is really in Corvallis. Yeah, he's from Southern California. He's got ties down there. He recruits Southern California very well. But his heart and his passion is really in Corvallis. It would take a lot to get him to leave that right now.
Okay, and then just switching over to Saturday.
Yeah.
You guys have some banged up. You have some banged up quarterbacks. Are there any news going on that point? Because that's one thing. Our ailing secondary, having like Schlee or someone else throwing the ball to be a lot better than your first two options. Is there any news on injuries?
Yeah, Schlee is probably less likely than is Garbers or Moore to be able to play. Now, you talk about USC's banged up secondary, and of course, Schlee is frankly not a very good passing quarterback. I mean, he's in there to go more, RPO with a little less P in the RPO. So it's it has been, the quarterback situation has been the biggest failure of Chip Kelly's offense this year. And let's remember, Chip calls his own offense. There's offensive guidance there, but he's calling the offense. And, you had the 5-star recruit in Dante Moore come in. And I think a lot of people were expecting Moore to be able to win the job pretty easily, and he didn't. And, you don't, when you cover UCLA practice, you don't see much beyond stretching and some special teams drills. And the quarterbacks are 100 yards away off in the corner where you can't really see them. But he went with this, rotation through the first 3 games. He had a conference games that had Ethan Garbers and had Colin Schlee and had Dante Moore. And there was really no sense of rhythm as to who was playing which series or which quarter or whatever. And he did that for 3 games. I think it really messed with Moore. The kid was a freshman, and he comes in with all the hype and everything that goes with being Chip Kelly's highest rated recruit that he'd had in his years at UCLA. And you tell the kid, you didn't win the job, but you're going to play. It's almost like a 3-game audition, but with all 3 quarterbacks. And as you saw the season go on and Moore play more, and even get some starts, the kid threw a pick 6 in 3 consecutive weeks. He never learned the progressions. He never made it down to look to his second and third reads in the progressions. When you go back and you look at the pick 6s that he threw, I mean, man, he was staring down the receiver. They really didn't take a lot of work on the part of the defensive backs to be able to do this. So the quarterback rotation has never made sense. And then when you have Moore and Schlee, and let's just use those 2 as your pairing for an example, they are completely different skill sets. I mean, Moore is not, you're still trying to run DTR's old offense with Moore, a guy who is not a significant running threat. He's not DTR. He's not going to, roll out and be as much of a threat to tuck it and run as, he is to throw it downfield. The kid's got a cannon for an arm. Let him play in the pro style offense. but instead of molding the offense to the talent he had on the field, Chip was trying to shoehorn the quarterbacks into what he wanted to run. And then you've got Schlee, who's a running quarterback. So when that's your pairing right there, if you're the offensive line, you got to turn around and look to see who the quarterback is from one series to another to know what scheme you're running. It was a disaster from the beginning. And so now what you have is 3 quarterbacks, all 3 of them banged up to different degrees of health, and none of them playing well. And that's what you go into rivalry week with. And honestly, that rests on Chip.
Oh, you paired offensive line disaster together, because that's where I was going next. USC has had its issues, a big part of the offense. I mean, we're still had to put up great numbers, but when USC needed pass protection, or when USC needed 2 or 3 yards, there were issues on the right side of our line. But going back to that Utah game, where I thought you guys really should have gone into right cycles and stole that one. But it did look, the issue in that game was the one of the pick sixes you were talking about, but also your offensive line. And that's been a concern, and maybe that's been the issue. You can't get your second progression if you got people all over you. So as far as USC's defense, how is USC going to get to UCLA, do you think?
I think that I think that when you hide the blitzes the way USC has the ability to, you're going to have shots at the quarterback. UCLA's offensive line has not proven that they stunt very well. They don't move the line very well. They play straight up offensive. They play a straight up push pretty well. And a lot of that has to do with the running backs are really kind of bruising running backs. You're not looking at, TJ Harden has got some good speed, but you're not looking at huge outside threats. UCLA's running game is really off tackle. And so the offensive line is really built for that push forward. Not a lot of successful stunting to protect trap plays. So if SC is bringing blitzes and hiding them well, it could be a long day for the UCLA quarterbacks.
Let's flip it to the other side. I think UCLA's path to victory here is to force turnovers. It's going to have to make some high impact plays on defense. And, USC's offensive line not been nearly as good as most of us, including myself, thought it would be. And of course, UCLA has figured out the defensive side of the ball and has played consistent, tough, physical football throughout this Pac-12 season. You can find a few exceptions, like Oregon State. That game got away from the UCLA defense. But for the most part, this defense has been consistent, reliable, tough, the exact opposite of how it was a year ago, at least to a certain degree. So what are the odds you'd assign to UCLA's ability to dominate the matchup up front against USC's offensive line, which is the gateway toward, strip sacking Caleb Williams, forcing some bad throws? What are the odds you'd assign to that?
I think they're good, actually. I think again, it's ironic that all of those years, UCLA's defense was the bane of Chip Kelly's existence. He stuck with Jerry Azzinaro, his old friend, as the defensive coordinator, even when all the evidence said Santa Claus had to go, and he was just adamant. And that's part of the stubbornness that is Chip Kelly. And while all head coaches are stubborn, it was so detrimental to the entire program. He gets D'Anton Lynn in there this year, and boy, is it different. Now, part of the reason it's different is the talent that's on the defense. A huge part of it is the use of the talent. Now, Tony, you talked about, a big part of the game being turnovers. UCLA's defense does not rank high nationally in forcing turnovers, but it is the number 1 overall defense in the country in terms of giving up rushing yards per game. They only give up 70 yards per game on the ground. And it is really blitzes from the outside. They've only given up 2 rushing touchdowns the entire season. If you haven't seen edge rusher Leatu Latu, boy, keep your eyes on this guy Saturday. Yeah. He is something special. He truly is. Transferred from Washington, coming out of a medical retirement after surgery on his neck, was told you can never play again. You're risking damage. He went into the UCLA Medical Center. They ran tests for weeks, and mobility tests and structural tests on his neck. And they're like, actually, the surgery went so well, we think you can play. He had a good year last year. He is having a phenomenal year this year. I will, we'll tell you things that we're not supposed to talk about the votes too much as we start to enter our Football Writers Association ballots. But I will tell you that out of all the defensive players, as we go position by position, out of the 450 or 460 members we have, he was the biggest vote getter on defense out of any position. He dominated his position in the votes by that much. Honestly, I got to think that he is probably one of the top 2 edge rushers USC will have seen all year. You've got the Murphy twins, who go back and forth, defensive line, linebacker can play on the edge. You can move them around a lot, and they're very elite. So I think that, UCLA tends to be a little vulnerable in one-on-one matchups on the outside with receivers. They play well over the middle, but on the outside, they are a little bit more vulnerable. If you're UCLA, that scares you because of Caleb Williams' mobility and his ability to throw on the run, hit the outside, make plays where they didn't exist, when it's not where the play was designed to go, kind of thing. And Williams is playing, school ground football, and it works because his receivers are always moving and staying open. So the key for UCLA's defense is to stay disciplined in the secondary. You're going to be able to penetrate the USC backfield. You're going to force Williams to move. You're probably going to have a relatively high degree of success against the running game. The key is for the defensive backs to stay disciplined with your man. Do not cut off your coverage because you see Williams take off and you think you're going to go get him. That discipline is going to be fundamental. Let him take off. Let him hit the edge. Let him get his 5, 6, 7, 8 yards on the ground. Don't give up the 30-yard pass play because you bailed out on the receiver.
Yeah, UCLA's against yards per play, not only in their running, but just overall, is 6th in the nation at 4.3.
Yep.
Going up against USC's offense, which is number 5 in the nation, just a little over 7 yards, 7.1 yards per play. That's going to be the interesting side. And again, the mess on the flip side is going to be interesting because I think that's where actually it's going to be won. I think that I don't think SC is going to be able to have a lot of success. I think that your pass rush, like you said, with Latu and the Murphy twins, that's going to be that's been our Achilles heel big time. We saw a nasty pass rush Notre Dame. We saw just last Saturday with Oregon athletes getting outside and running him down, not letting him get comfortable back there. That's going to be really interesting. I think whichever weakness, who steps up, USC's defense or your offense, because that's why I'm really curious. That's why it's hinging on. I'm curious to see if you're going to be able to. The big thing for me is will you guys will we see Garbers? Because I think your guys' best chance to win is if Garbers can get out there remotely healthy.
I agree. Schlee's not the answer, and I do think Schlee is less likely to see the snaps. You worry about throwing a true freshman out there who's already been through the grinder this year and putting him out in a full Coliseum, a rivalry game, and all of that. So I think I would agree with that it's critical for UCLA if they see more Garbers than anything else.
One thought here real quick is that, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but a good starting point that I usually look at when a offense is this inept versus a defense that is the same is that it's almost contingent on the offense to execute, meaning even a bad defense can't throw and catch for you. So if the throws are off, dropped passes, missed blocks, even against bad defenders. They're going to shoot through gaps if there are missed assignments along the offensive line. That usually the weakness on weakness matchup favors the defense because it's still incumbent on the offense to execute. That's one thought.
Yeah.
And also, I'm a bit curious because I'm trying to think what games I've seen UCLA. I don't know that I've watched them play start to finish. I saw some of the Oregon State games, some of the Utah game, and so forth, and a few other matchups. But 35th in the nation in total offense. Now, of course, they've been completely shut down here the last few weeks against Arizona State. But they obviously, now one consideration there is their non-conference schedule was super light. So they bulked up on those numbers, but that's only 3 out of 10 games. So at one point in this season, there was offensive production there somewhere.
There was, I think, a couple of things. One, to take your first point real quick, I think what you're talking about really is just opportunities, period. In a game like this, the offense, if you've got a struggling offense and a defense that's vulnerable, you're talking about you cannot miss out on the opportunities. In college football now, with the change in the clock and so on, you're looking at 60 to 65 plays on offense per game. So you're down about 10, 12, maybe 15 plays over what it used to be. You cannot miss those opportunities when they're in front of you, especially in an emotional game like this. In terms of, in terms of how that flows and how that works through, UCLA, obviously, with whatever quarterback they've got to have a diversified offense. Sorry, what was the second point again? I went on for so long.
Well, it was basically that we know that the non-conference schedule was super
UCLA's
soft,
offense,
35th in the nation, and in again, not diving in deep into the metrics, but total offense number 35.
Sure. Yeah, we have looked at the metrics and because that's the kind of nerds we are here. It really is a bit of a slide because you did have the big numbers in the out of conference games. You had some opponents that were, pretty easily overmatched, but over the last month, those numbers, you would have seen UCLA, about top 25, top 23 about 6 weeks ago. Now they're 35 and sliding in the wrong direction. In large part the last 2 games, but the offensive production has just been inconsistent over the last month. And that's got to concern you if you're UCLA, because Caleb Williams is going to put up some points. They just are. There's too much talent between him, his receivers. They're going to put up some points. I don't think UCLA has to worry about a shootout. This isn't a, 55-48 game by any stretch, but you've got to put up some points and you've got to take advantage of opportunities when they're there. UCLA, again, does not create a lot of turnovers. You get 1 or 2, you have to, you cannot settle for field goals. You cannot have the epic failures in the red zone that you had with Chip Kelly play calling against Arizona State last week. It has got to be touchdowns every time, and you have to be perfect in the red zone.
And yet this team is only a 5.5 point underdog. So
Vegas is having a weird week. Oregon State's a 1 point favorite over Washington. So it's a weird, it's a strange week in a lot of places.